Dambisa Moyo is over here.
Well, if you haven't read the book, Dead Aid, you should.
You're on the most influential list of people, all because you come out and say, maybe aid isn't a good thing.
Dambisa Moyo is important, and perhaps her argument against aid is even more important.
Because people aren't used to hearing, don't give money to Africa. You say that we're going down the wrong path.
Moyo is part of a new movement of economists arguing against aid. You may have heard of the book When Helping Hurts, or even watched the movie Poverty, Inc. But among these new voices arguing against aid, Dambisa Moyo's voice is perhaps the most important, for one crucial reason. She's African. In 2009, Dambisa Moyo published Dead Aid, which argues against country-to-country transfers, which over the past 50 years have amounted to some $2 trillion. $2 trillion. In the decades following World War II, Europe and Africa entered the age of decolonization, where Europe no longer had hold of its former colonies in Africa, and the age of independence began. These countries of Europe still wanted to hold their influence over these recently decolonized countries, and the new way of doing that was aid. Often, aid was done in the name of philanthropy, but usually there were strings attached, and governments often gave loans at sub-market level interest rates. For years, we've thought of this as the most effective way of alleviating poverty, but Moyo argues something different. The trouble with the aid dependency motto is, of course, that Africa is fundamentally kept in its childlike state.
Aid has been a complete disaster. We've actually seen over the past 40, 50 years, growth slow in the continent, over the continent, and we've seen poverty rise. So for example, in the 1970s, about 10% of the African population was living in dire economic consequences. Today, over 70% of Africans live on $2 a day or below.
Often with influxes of aid comes with stipulation. For example, donors could stipulate what the money is spent on, which sectors of the economy get it, or even what policies are implemented in the country. Often these good intentions encourage democracy, but Moyo makes a bold claim.
Give me liberty or give me death is all well and good if you can afford it. But if you're living on less than $1 a day, you're far too busy trying to survive and to provide for your family than to spend your time going around trying to proclaim and defend democracy.
Maybe democracy doesn't cause economic growth. Maybe economic growth causes democracy. Yet, if democracy isn't the cause of economic growth, what's the cause? Moyo argues for solid institutions. Is rule of law protected? Is private property protected? Yet, despite aid's effort to create democracy, Moyo argues that often the opposite results. Dictatorship. The dictator Mobutu of Zaire is famous for having stolen $5 billion from the Congolese people. Likewise, the Nigerian dictator Sani Abacha stole a similar amount of money.
In the past 6 months, we've had 4 coups, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Mauritania, and just last week, Madagascar. These are an artifact of this aid system where the only source of capital is, and the most important thing that you can try and capture is the state, because that's where the money is.
When societies are corrupt, the local economy won't grow. Entrepreneurs need incentives in order to take risks. Entrepreneurs don't want to lose their investments. Governments often reallocate funds and make it look like progress is being made while reallocating funds into private accounts. In the 1990s, only 20% of the designated foreign aid to help local education reforms made it to the designated schools.
The problem's not aid, it's corrupt leaders.
I don't think you can delink the two in the African context. I think an aid model makes good leaders bad and makes bad leaders worse.
Also, aid creates a cycle of dependency, and not a good cycle of dependency. Aid forces governments to become dependent on outside donors instead of their local citizens. When governments are not accountable to their people, they are more likely to become destructive. And not only does aid cause corruption, it can also cause inflation or lower amounts of exports or even lower savings. But Moyo is hopeful. She argues for a 5 to 10 year plan to reduce the amount of aid to countries in Africa.
Because I'm not saying that people shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying we can do it better. We have a lot of information about the things that actually work in reducing poverty and creating jobs and long-term growth. But giving money without any conditions, or basically giving money with no restrictions, just doesn't work anywhere.
Perhaps Africa has the ability to help itself. We've tried giving it aid and it hasn't worked. So let's try something different. Let's give Africa the right to help itself. Moyo's declarations have certainly faced adversity. Aid workers, politicians, and even Bill Gates have criticized her for her claims.
I found that she didn't know much about aid and what aid was doing, and she is an aid critic. There's not many, because it's moralistically a tough position to take, given what aid has been able to do.
But Dambisa's message is still important. Moyo isn't just another outsider trying to proclaim what's best for Africa. She's an insider, and maybe that in itself is a reason to listen.
I am arguing that aid is not benign. In fact, indeed, if it were benign, I wouldn't be sitting here, I wouldn't have written the book. The problem is that it's malignant. There are lots of things we can do. At the government level, we should be encouraging trade. We should be encouraging African governments to get off of aid and start to look for alternative ways of financing development, such as foreign direct investment, accessing the capital markets, through remittances. And on the individual level, we can support African entrepreneurs through microfinance.
Ultimately, it's about transforming the world and making it a better place. Thank you very much.